There is no silence in the warp, only the endless scream of thought and memory, twisted into storms that devour meaning itself. Somewhere within that maelstrom drifts what was once a soul, the faint echo of a life, extinguished by bolter fire, by faith, by fear. It does not rest, it cannot. The Emperor's light does not reach this far, and the tides of madness rise without restraint. Voices whisper in impossible languages, promising sanctuary, power, oblivion, and yet all of them lie. For the warp hungers not for faith or flesh, but for the story a mind once told itself, the story of being alive. To die in the Imperium is to gamble your eternity, for the commoner who perishes nameless. There is only the slow unraveling, consciousness, fading like smoke beneath the weight of unreal tides. For the psyker, for the saint, for the damned, the story is far worse, because in the warp awareness is pain, and the more a soul once believed and the stronger its conviction, the brighter its fire, the longer it takes to be extinguished. That is what awaits beyond the veil, a place where gods are parasites, hope is a mirage, and the only mercy is to be forgotten. If you find yourself drawn into that abyss, traveler of the grimdark, lend your strength to this channel's light. Like, share, and subscribe, not as empty gestures, but as offerings to knowledge itself. For in a universe where ignorance is death, understanding is the only act of rebellion left to us. He had forgotten his name long before the shot found him. It had been spoken once, perhaps in a briefing, hall on some forgotten world where banners of the Astra Militarum still fluttered, where commanders shouted orders beneath the thunder of orbital fire. But now it was gone. All that remained was the weight of the laser gun in his trembling hands, the static hiss of his vox bead, and the taste of promethium drifting on the burning wind. The world around him had collapsed into ruin, not the sudden ruin of bombardment, but the slow, grinding decay that came when men had fought too long in one place. Manufactorum shells lay cracked open like carcasses, their steel ribs glowing faintly red where molten slag still flowed. Above, the sky was not a sky at all, but a shroud of ash and dust that turned every breath into a punishment. He could not see the sun. Perhaps there was no sun left to see. He fell to his knees beside a crater filled with what might once have been comrades. The air smelled of burnt oil, seared flesh, and ozone. His vox emitted only the faintest echoes, whispers layered upon whispers, as if 1,000 dying soldiers were speaking across overlapping channels. Somewhere in that static, he thought he heard his own voice calling for extraction, though he knew no rescue was coming. He looked down at his armor, once the gray-green of the 132nd Vortigern, now blackened and cracked. The Imperial Aquila etched upon his chestplate was half melted. Its wings curled inward as though even the symbol of the Imperium itself had grown weary of flight. His hands shook. The last pack was empty. He thought of reloading, then realized there was no point. The front was gone. The regiment was gone. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the mist, the loping gait of something not human, its eyes glinting like coals through the haze. He reached for his combat knife, though he could barely lift his arm. The pain in his chest pulsed with every breath, each heartbeat weaker than the last. When the shape drew closer, it was only smoke, curling into the shape of an enemy that wasn't there. He laughed, though the sound was little more than a rasp. Then the ground shifted beneath him, not physically, but in perception. The air grew thick. The world began to tilt. It was as though gravity had remembered him after forgetting for a time, dragging his spirit downward through layers of unseen weight. He tried to call out on the vox again, but what came from his lips was not sound, only the whisper of breath leaving his body. And then, for the first time, he noticed the silence. Not the silence of battle's end, but a deeper one. A silence that existed beneath sound itself, the kind that waited, patient and infinite. He realized with a strange detachment that his heart had stopped. His lungs still moved, perhaps by habit, but there was nothing to breathe. He was already dead. The thought should have brought terror. Instead, it brought clarity. The smoke ceased to sting his eyes. The heat of the burning manufactorum faded into something distant, irrelevant. He could see more clearly than before, not with sight, but with some inner sense, as if perception itself had widened. The world shimmered at its edges, trembling like a mirage. He looked at his hand and saw light leaking from it. Faint at first, then growing brighter, like sunlight diffused through blood. Threads of pale luminance traced along his veins, flickering through the cracks in his armor. It was beautiful in a way he had never known beauty. Clean, indifferent, infinite. Then he felt the pull. It began as a gentle current, drawing at the edges of thought, tugging him toward something vast and unseen. His mind protested, clinging to what remained of his body, the cold weight of armor, the stink of blood, the dim outline of the battlefield. But the pull strengthened, irresistible. Memory unraveled. Images flashed and bled into one another. A barracks bunk beneath a leaking roof, a comrade laughing over contraband amasec, a child he might have once known. Each image dissolved as soon as it surfaced, consumed by the current that beckoned him onward. The world dimmed into abstraction. For an instant he was aware of both his corpse and himself, as though watching from above. The body lay sprawled upon the cracked soil, eyes open toward the sky that offered no light. Then that too vanished, swallowed by the thickening dark. He fell. There was no sensation of motion, only the impression of descent, of something slipping free from the lattice of reality. The further he fell, the more distant the material world became. He thought of prayers once recited during deployment, the rote invocations to the Emperor that had long since lost their meaning. Now they returned not as words but as echoes of faith without form. The Emperor protects. The phrase repeated itself, distorted, overlapping, a mantra breaking apart under the pressure of infinity. He tried to cling to it, but the current laughed, not with sound but with feeling, and a deep, resonant mockery that rippled through the void. It was as if the warp itself found amusement in his devotion. He wanted to shout, to resist, to demand meaning, but his voice was gone. Even thought was beginning to dissolve. Then came the light again. Not the gentle luminance of his departing spirit, but a violent glare that seared through the darkness like molten glass. It was not warmth, not salvation, but awareness. He could see shapes moving within it, vast silhouettes that shifted like smoke given hunger and form. They were not demons in the way the ecclesiarchy had spoken of them. They were far older, their malice impersonal. They drifted through the void like predators through deep water, each drawn by the faintest vibration of thought. He realized too late that he was the vibration. One of the shapes turned toward him. Its presence was not seen but felt. A pressure behind the eyes, a claw upon the soul. The soldier's instinct screamed. In the absence of flesh, instinct was all he had left, and even that began to fray. The creature did not approach. It unfolded, expanding across dimensions he could not name. Every memory he still possessed trembled under its gaze. He remembered the trenches of Ortega Prime, the endless mud, the way the sky turned green when the atmosphere burned. He remembered the prayer discs etched into his armor, the half-melted sigil of the Imperial Aquila. He remembered trying to believe that the Emperor truly saw him. The thing laughed again, a soundless rupture in reality, and those memories ignited. Like dry parchment, his past burned away, feeding the creature's hunger. For a moment he felt nothing but the raw, unbearable exposure of being seen by something that should not see. Then it passed. The shape moved on, leaving him hollow. He drifted for what might have been seconds or millennia. Time did not exist here, only persistence. He sensed other souls around him, though around was a meaningless word. They whispered to one another, fragments of thought carried by psychic currents. Most were incoherent, some pleading, others cursing, a few simply repeating the same words over and over. A woman's voice prayed for her children. A man recited coordinates for an evacuation that never came. All of them blurred together, forming a chorus of endless confusion. He wanted to speak, to join them, but he had forgotten how. The current shifted again, and he felt something pulling harder, dragging him deeper into the void. The voices grew fainter, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It resonated within his essence, making what remained of his awareness tremble. He did not know what awaited below, only that resistance was impossible. For a fleeting moment he wondered if this was judgment, if perhaps the Emperor sat somewhere beyond this storm, measuring the worth of those who died in his name. But even that thought dissolved into uncertainty, because if there was judgment, it was not merciful. The warp did not separate the faithful from the heretic. It devoured all with equal appetite. As he descended, he began to notice color, faint, liquid hues moving like smoke in a void of glass. They were not colors he recognized. They seemed to shift each time he tried to define them. They pulsed in rhythm with his fading awareness, as though mocking the last heartbeat he no longer had. The deeper he went, the more the warp seemed to recognize him. Threads of energy coiled around his essence, probing, tasting, learning. It was not a place but a hunger made into geometry, a storm without sky. Every thought he dared form became substance. Every fear turned into shape. He realized that the warp was not chaos imposed upon him. It was chaos mirrored by him. The boundaries between observer and environment had collapsed. He was becoming what he perceived. A sudden clarity cut through the confusion. This was the truth denied by priests and commanders alike. Death was not the end. It was merely the beginning of consumption. Souls were not judged or rewarded. They were recycled, torn apart to feed the psychic ecosystem of gods and monsters. The Emperor's light was not salvation, but containment, a lighthouse built against a storm that could never be calmed. The revelation brought no peace, only horror. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, like static, the residue of broken Vox transmissions. But it grew, layered, resonant, transforming into something almost melodic. It was the sound of thought collapsing into sound, the hum of the warp itself. He felt it pass through him, vibrating his essence until every fragment of what he had been trembled in response. And then he understood. The sound was his name, or what was left of it, not spoken aloud but remembered. It was not enough to save him, but it anchored him for a heartbeat longer, granting him the illusion of self amid the sea. That heartbeat, that single echo of identity, was all that separated him from total erasure. He clung to it, desperate, refusing to let go. The current raged against him. Voices rose like a storm, demanding surrender, promising oblivion. He could feel his essence tearing apart, unraveling into psychic mist. But something, some stubborn fragment of human will, refused to yield. Perhaps it was faith or defiance or the simple instinct to exist. Whatever it was, it burned bright, a spark against the endless dark. The warp screamed, and for the briefest of moments the screaming stopped. He floated in silence again, but this time it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of endurance. He did not know how long it would last. He did not know if he had truly resisted or merely delayed the inevitable. But he existed, and in the warp, existence itself was victory. Somewhere distantly, he sensed motion, a faint light glimmering through the tides, beckoning him onward. Whether it was salvation or deception, he could not tell. But he followed it, because there was nothing else left to follow. And thus began the journey through the sea without light. The light was no light at all. It pulsed like a wound, bleeding brilliance into the void, its edges dissolving into endless shadow. The soldier drifted toward it not through movement, but through intent, though even intent was beginning to lose meaning here. There was no direction in the warp, no distance to measure, no passage of time. Thought and place were one, and the boundaries that once defined reality were devoured long ago by the tides of the Imperium. At first he believed the glow to be salvation, a fragment of the Emperor's light piercing through the storm. The ecclesiarchy had spoken of such things, of souls guided home by the beacon of his will, but the closer he drew, the less it resembled anything divine. The illumination flickered, changed color, pulsed with rhythm like breath. It was alive. And worse, it was aware. He felt it before he saw it. A presence vast and intimate, both near and infinitely far, watching with a hunger that was neither cruel nor kind, merely inevitable. His essence quivered beneath its gaze. It was not one being but many, an amalgam of thought and emotion, rage, longing, despair, ecstasy interwoven like the currents of a great ocean. It did not speak, yet its silence pressed into his mind like fingers through soft clay. He tried to remember what he was. A soldier, yes, a man of the Imperium, a servant of the Emperor of mankind. The words felt hollow now, stripped of context. The Imperium was a world of flesh and steel, of banners and law. Here, those things were as fragile as smoke. What use were oaths in a place that devoured meaning itself? He drifted deeper, pulled by invisible threads. Around him, the colors of the warp rippled, crimson, indigo, gold, and shades that did not exist in mortal perception. They danced and tore at one another, colliding in flashes of impossible geometry. Every explosion of light birthed new shapes, new entities. Some burned bright for a heartbeat and vanished. Others lingered, coalescing into distorted reflections of the living. One drifted close, a form almost human, though stretched and blurred, as if sculpted from memories. Its face was a shifting mask of agony and wonder, eyes like molten glass. The soldier tried to speak, to ask if it too was lost, but his thoughts scattered upon contact. The thing reached toward him, its arm elongating, fracturing into strands of liquid light. The touch was not cold or warm, but consuming. Where it brushed his essence, he felt memories tear loose. His regiment's name, his homeworld's scent, the color of his commander's eyes. Gone, absorbed. He recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. The sea offered no refuge. The form watched him, or perhaps it was his own reflection watching itself. And then it disintegrated, scattering into sparks that merged back into the current. He was alone again, though the word alone had begun to lose its meaning too. Everywhere he sensed life that was not life. Entities drifted through the psychic tides, drawn to him by the faint trace of humanity that still clung to his essence. Some were fragments of emotion, the echo of a mother's grief, the fury of a slain commissar, the laughter of a heretic burned at the stake. Others were older, their minds vast and unknowable. He glimpsed them at the edges of perception, shadows shaped like cities, dreams made flesh, beasts that spoke in pulses of color and song. Each one regarded him for a moment before moving on, uninterested. To them, he was too small to matter. The realization was liberating and terrifying. He was beneath notice, a speck in an infinite storm. As he drifted, the hum of the warp grew louder, not sound, but vibration through thought. It filled him, resonating in rhythms that blurred into sensation. He began to feel the emotions of the warp around him. Despair as dense as gravity, ecstasy sharp as broken glass, hunger that smelled of ozone and blood. These were not his feelings, yet they passed through him as though his soul were porous. He tried to resist, to define himself against the tide, but each resistance only deepened the merging. He no longer knew which emotions were his own. A memory surfaced, unbidden, vivid. The trenches of Vortiga Prime, mud thick with rain and blood. His squad crouched behind the shattered remains of a Chimera transport. Lay's guns clutched tight. The air had smelled of cordite and copper. A commissar had shouted a prayer to the Emperor before, leading a charge that no one survived. The soldier remembered feeling fear then, sharp, physical, contained. But here fear was oceanic. It had no edge, no relief. The memory faded, leaving behind only sensation. The warp had tasted it. He began to suspect that this was how it fed, not by devouring flesh, but by consuming remembrance. The stronger the emotion, the brighter the flavor. Faith, despair, rage, love, all were nourishment for the storm. In life, such feelings gave meaning. In death, they became currency. As he pondered this, the current shifted once more, carrying him toward a darker region of the sea. The light here was dimmer, slower, pulsing in sickly hues. He sensed movement, not the chaotic dance of energy, but deliberate motion, purposeful and slow. The air, though there was no air, thickened with presence. Then he saw them. They moved like silhouettes cut from shadow, each one towering and indistinct, their outlines wavering as if reality itself refused to hold them. Their forms were stitched together from thought and terror, monstrous reflections of mortal minds. Demons, though not the lesser spawn whispered of by guardsmen. These were something grander, older. Their bodies shimmered with impossible symmetry, adorned with sigils that hurt to perceive. One of them turned. Its gaze fell upon him and the universe inverted. He did not see it so much as experience it. The creature's awareness engulfed him, peeling away layers of memory and emotion like bark from a tree. He felt it tasting him, sorting through the contents of his being, curiosity, pity, contempt. For an instant, he was a child again, staring up at the cathedral's mural of the Emperor enthroned in gold. Then the image shattered, replaced by laughter that vibrated through every atom of his essence. Faith. The thought came, not in words but in pulse and pressure. Such a fragile flavor. He tried to flee, but there was no distance to cross. The demon's attention alone held him frozen. Its face, one if it had one, was a swirl of colors that burned against the void, eyes like apertures opening into deeper infinities. Its laughter was thunder that broke thought itself. "You are not yours," it murmured, or perhaps he imagined it. "You never were." Then it released him. He fell upward, downward, sideways. Directions lost all meaning again. The thing receded, dissolving into the maelstrom, bored of its toy. He was free, though freedom meant little here. Every shred of him that had resisted the warp was thinner now, translucent. If he had lungs, he would have screamed, but all that escaped was light. He began to drift once more, though the word drift implied choice. The warp carried him, shaped him, hollowed him. He could feel his identity stretching thin, like parchment soaked in fire. Each thought cost more effort to maintain. The memories he clung to, his comrades, his regiment, even his name, flickered like dying embers. In their place, new sensations began to form. He could feel the thoughts of others, distant but resonant. Thousands of lost souls all bleeding into one another. There was no separation here, only a vast collective dreaming. At first he feared dissolution, but as the tide swept through him, another realization struck. This unity was not death. It was transformation. He felt joy from somewhere not his own, brief, fierce, utterly alien. Then sorrow belonging to someone he had never met. Each emotion passed through him like a wave, reshaping what little he still was. He was becoming part of something larger, something beyond comprehension. And yet, somewhere deep within, a whisper persisted, a voice quieter than breath, older than memory. "I am." The simplicity of that thought stunned him. Amid the chaos, amid the endless merging of consciousness, a single spark of identity remained. "I am." It was not defiance. It was truth. The warp shifted again as if it too had noticed. The currents around him grew turbulent, boiling with motion. Shapes coalesced, drawn to that spark like predators to blood. He felt them closing in, not one or two, but multitudes. Faces formed within the storm, mouths whispering fragments of every language that had ever been spoken. The air crackled with psychic heat. He did not run. He could not. He only thought the words again, "I am." The storm erupted. The entities struck all at once, tearing through his essence like talons through smoke. He felt every emotion ever lived, agony, bliss, terror, exaltation in a single infinite instant. His awareness shattered into shards, scattering across the psychic tide. For a heartbeat or a millennium, he ceased to exist. Then, impossibly, he reformed. Not whole, but enough. Enough to feel. Enough to remember that he had once been human, and somewhere within the distance between thought and oblivion, he felt a presence watching. Not a demon this time, not hunger or malice, but something colder, structured, deliberate. It observed, measured, calculated. For the first time since death, he sensed a shape that did not belong to the chaos. Angular, metallic, ancient. He did not understand how such a thing could exist here, but he felt its gravity nonetheless. A void within the void. A fortress of order amid entropy, and as he drifted toward it, his fading consciousness began to whisper the same thought again and again. Perhaps this was not damnation. Perhaps this was witness. The sea without light had shown him the face of eternity. And now, something within that eternity was looking back. The closer he came to the shape, the less there was of the warp. It was as if someone had cut a precise wound into the storm and stitched its edges shut with invisible thread. Around its perimeter, the tides broke like surf against rock, colors collapsing into grays, sound folding inward until only a pressure remained. He felt the change first as pain, a tightness, a narrowing. The ache of being forced back into contours he had already begun to shed. Where chaos had wanted him porous, this place demanded boundaries. At the threshold, the predators peeled away. The lesser things fled as if burned. Greater minds circled at a respectful distance, tasting the edge with long, patient tendrils of thought before withdrawing, dissatisfied. He sensed their reluctance and understood that the void ahead was poisonous to them. What he mistook for metal was not matter at all. But absence given contour, an architecture built from refusal. It felt like corridors without walls, alcoves without air, angles that insisted on rightness even when the universe had no right left to give. He drifted across that boundary, and the sea went silent inside him. Not the annihilating silence of despair, but the plain, unadorned quiet of a room after the hymn ends. In that hush, memory stopped leaking. Details returned with startling fidelity. The scratch on his laser gun's trigger, guard where he had pried a stuck, ring free with a mess knife. The way winter smelled on Vortiga Prime, iron and wet slate. The exact scuff pattern on Sergeant Havel's greaves from too many forced marches over cinder. Each recollection arrived cleanly, unchewed by predatory interest. For the first time since death, he felt a shape to himself that did not buckle under observation. It was not mercy. It was geometry. The space extended in planes his mortal senses would have called corridors because his mind needed corridors to move through. He let the old habit of marching carry him, one step after another without feet, along a line that existed only because he demanded it. In the corners, if corners could be said to exist, faint inscriptions flickered, more absence etched into absence. He could not read them, yet his thoughts slid along their grooves and came away drier, steadier, as if some psychic condensate had been scraped from him. He could not help but wonder what cast this shadow into the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy had stories of relic shrine, processions whose prayer engines churned a lane of stillness through the warp tide. Voidfarers swore that certain hulls bore ancient bones in their keels, and that those bones drank from the sea. Tech priests spoke, behind sealed vox grills and ritual static, of machines too old for litany that bit the storm like blackstone teeth. He had no authority to know which rumors were true. He only knew the effect. Around this place the warp forgot him, and in that forgetting he remembered himself. He walked, and time regained a little meaning. Not clocks, not measures, but sequence. Before and after stitched themselves back together. With sequence came grief, simple and human. He remembered the men who had died near him and felt their absence, the way one feels an empty bunk in the dark. The pain rose cleanly, without the sea's embellishment, and he bowed beneath it. If his eyes had been eyes, they would have stung. He found he preferred this honest ache to the vast flavored despair outside. In the distance, an invented term that nonetheless helped him endure. Something pulsed once, then again, not light. A cadence. A lighthouse would have announced itself with blaze. This was the negative of a beacon, regular moments where the absence deepened, like a heartbeat heard through bone. On each beat the knot corridors clarified, the inscriptions crisped, and his sense of self hardened another fraction. Between beats, thin filaments of the sea probed inward and evaporated with little sighs. He listened to that cadence and realized it belonged to intention. A will somewhere was maintaining this place. Maintaining, not inviting. There was no welcome here, only a task performed with meticulous indifference. He pictured robed silhouettes he had glimpsed in Manufactoria, their augmetic, fingers turning prayer wheels, with machine patience while sparks danced and the air tasted of hot copper. He tasted the same austerity now. The thought steadied him further. Purpose could be a floor. At the fourth pulse, a tremor ran across the absence. The knot walls shivered. Outside, the sea rose, sensing a weakness. It pressed its face to the glass of this geometry and breathed frost. Something large moved through the currents beyond. A shoal of intentions braided into one appetite. He felt their interest, and the old, learned reflex returned. Brace. Breathe, wait for the order. No order came. He set his jaw anyway. A habit carried here without bones to support it. A figure stood ahead of him. He had not seen it appear. It was simply there on the next beat, where the corridor narrowed into a point of more perfect dark. It wore no features his mind could settle on. Where eyes would have been were planes that refused to be looked into, the way one cannot stare directly at the space under a blade's edge. The figure raised a hand, and by reflex he came to attention. The gesture did not command, it defined. The sea's probing eased, the tremor steadied, and the corridor remembered how to hold still. Designation, the figure said, except it did not speak. The sense of the word arrived, clean and empty of flavor. He waited for a name and found none waiting back. Something in him fluttered, embarrassed by the lack. The figure's knot eyes regarded the flutter without judgment. Unknown, the meaning concluded for him, and inscribed itself somewhere he could not see. He tried to ask what this place was, not with words, which remained an unreliable vessel here, but with the shape of a question, angle softened, center offered, edges held back. The figure's silence absorbed the query and returned with a simpler geometry. You are within a wake.